Hi and welcome to Swedish Plantguys. We got a lot of questions concerning how do you repot a self-watering pot? What do you do with the roots that are coming out of the inner pot and going down into the water reservoir? How often should you repot a self-watering pot? So in this video we cover all of the steps to repot a self-watering pot. So let's break this down, because we not only want you to know how to do this, we want you to know why and when you should be doing this. So we'll break this video down into 3 parts. Why do we repot? When do we repot? And how do we repot? And you'll have timestamps in the description below. So starting off, for you guys that don't know, what is a self-watering pot? Well, you can look at it like this. This is a store-bought self-watering pot. It has an outer pot like this, where it will be water inside of this. That is the water reservoir. You have an inner pot like this. This is where the plant is planted. And then you have some way to get the water from the water reservoir into the soil and up to the roots. In this case, we have a nylon rope that is pushing the water up into the soil. That is a self-watering container or a self-watering system. We also have a water meter here, so that when we have water in the bottom of this pot, you have a meter that goes up. So you can see how much water you have down in the water reservoir. Now, we will be showing you this on a pot that looks like this. But there is another way that is quite common. Usually it's with bigger pots. Now you have the plastic insert as well here. This usually goes in an outer pot, of a ceramic pot or maybe a terracotta pot or something. But we don't have the same type of a system. Because what you do inside of this is that you have a raised bottom. Now, underneath that raised bottom is where you have the water reservoir. So it's actually standing like this down into the pot. And then you have small holes inside of this little tube here that pushes the water up into the soil. And you have this tube here where you can measure the water inside of the water reservoir. And we'll get to that later, because the repot looks a little bit different depending on if it's this type of a system or if it's this type of a system where you have the inner pot inside of this. Know that everything in this video can be used on most types of indoor tropical plants and in all sizes of self-watering systems. So why do we repot a self-watering system or a self-watering pot? Well, there are a couple of indications that you need to do something. First of all, what usually happens is that you get a lot of water roots. And I'll show you here. I have 2 different types of plants here. I have one that is a Ficus microcarpa, ginseng, I believe it is, or it's called like that here in Sweden. And I also have a Hoya that is climbing on this wire here, so that you have a circular form to it. Now, both of these have been planted in the same pot for more than 10 years. I think it's 12, maybe 13 years now. But I have repotted or root pruned during the way, and we will show you that later on. But the first indication that you need to do something in a self-watering system is that this will probably happen. You have a ton of water roots coming out and just taking up all of the space in the water reservoir. When it starts to look like this, you need to consider doing something, and that is root pruning. I'll show you in the other pot as well, because it looks almost the same way. But then you can see that These are two completely different species, but it looks the same inside of the reservoir. You have roots covering the entire system down here. So that is one indication that you need to repot or prune the roots. Now you can also have an indication if you have loss of percolation. Now what that means is that when you water this system here, I always water on top of the soil, or in this case pumice here, and then the water goes through the entire root ball and goes out through the small holes in the bottom here down into the water reservoir. Then I can see how much water I have in the reservoir. You could also remove this and water straight into the reservoir. Our recommendation though is to water on top of the soil or substrate you have up here, because that actually sparks and triggers more root growth in the soil or in the substrate if you water like that. And it's also easier to add nutrition to this whole system by you doing that with the water, so that the soil here can absorb the nutrients and the excess can go down into the water reservoir. So you trigger the roots here, but if you have loss of percolation, that means that when I water here, the water doesn't go through, at least not quickly. It actually stays here and it takes a long time to go through. That means that you have so much roots that the water cannot find a path to go through. It also means that the soil or substrate here is probably not that much and it cannot hold a lot of water. So that is an indication that you need to repot or prune the roots. Another indication is that you don't have enough water retention. What I mean by that, if you water on top of the soil or substrate here, that water just runs straight through the entire system and ends up in the water reservoir quickly. That probably means that you have no water retention in the soil. It cannot absorb and release water to the roots, which will mean that all of the soil roots inside of this inner pot will die. So you will only have the water roots down here. Could mean that the plant will survive, but it will never thrive as much as it could. So if you have loss of water retention, it's time to prune or repot. Another thing that can happen is that you see that the entire plant starts to get a little bit shaded. All of the leaves at the same time. You know that you haven't had it in full direct sunlight, so it's not that is shading the leaves, but it looks like it's feeling well, but it's starting to get shaded. That could mean that you have a nutrient deficiency. If you have a nutrient deficiency, but you know that you have added nutrients, then the soil is not able to hold on to nutrients and release them to the roots anymore. So all of the nutrients are just going straight through the system or staying in the system, which is even worse, but the plant cannot get a hold of that. That is also an indication you need to repot. Now, in worst case scenario, what happens is that you get a salt buildup, because nutrients that you give to your plant is basically salt that when mixed with water adds the nutrients to the roots and to the plant. But if you have too much of that, you get a salt buildup. You can get that in normal standard planting soil, but you will get it even more if you're using, let's say, pumice, as I am in this system here. As you can see here on top of the soil here, you actually have some salt buildup. See where I can show you. I can show you here where you have salt buildup on the stones. It's that white little bit fluffy substance on top of the on the pellets or on the pumice. That is salt. When you see that, it's also an indication that it's time to repot or prune the roots. So number 2, when is it time to do a repot in a self-watering container or system? Well, we always recommend, no matter what type of a repot it is, to do that repot in early spring or in early autumn. The reason for that is that those 2 times of the year, the plant is in what we call an energy positive. For instance, in spring, you have a dormancy over the winter time. Even if it's inside and you have the same temperature, the plant will recognize that it's not getting as much light as it is in summer or spring, and the humidity is going down. That triggers the plant to be a little bit dormant. What that means is that it's holding a lot of that energy. So when you get more and more light during spring, you get a higher humidity indoors, it's time to grow. That is an energy positive, and that is a perfect time to go in and do a repot or pruning of the roots. You have the same thing in autumn. In summer, it's extremely hot. You have direct sunlight maybe hitting the plant. All of its energy is going to just move water within the plant to keep it from dehydrating. So it doesn't have the energy or the time to grow. But when summer is over, it has a positive of all of that nice sunlight, and most of that energy will go to the roots. That is also a time to go in and repot or prune the roots. Now I have to say, and we say this a lot on this channel, we only do a repot or a pruning of the foliage or the roots when the plant is feeling well. If you see that a plant is not feeling well, it is not time to do a repot if it's not one of the indications we mentioned earlier. Because if it's already a little bit sad or low in energy, if you go in and prune the roots, you will just harm it even more. So we only do it when you see that it's feeling well. If it's not feeling well, try and rectify whatever problem you have, then you do a repot. Unless you have the indications that we mentioned earlier, then you should repot. Now in a self-watering system or a self-watering pot, you don't have to repot as often as you do in a normal pot like this one here. In this one, we usually say every 2 to 3 years. If you don't have any indications, it could be a good thing to do a repot anyway, as long as the plant is feeling well, because you need new soil that can absorb water and nutrients and give that to the roots. So every 2 to 3 years in a pot like this. In a self-watering pot or a self-watering system, you don't have to do that. What we recommend is that if you don't have any indications at all, it looks fine, you don't have loss of percolation or anything, then you can repot every 3 to 5 years. So you can wait a little bit longer. However, during that time, you could be pruning the water roots. What I mean by that is that it can look like this quite quickly. If you have a plant that is just loving your home, it can look like this in 2 to 3 years. And if it does, then it's time to go in and prune these roots. But you don't do a complete repot. You just prune the water roots. And I'll show you later on how to do that. So how do we repot or prune the roots in a self-watering system? Well, there are 3 different ways you can do this. Now, the first way we only call root pruning. It's not actually a repot, it's just a pruning of the water roots. And how do you do that, and how much should you prune? Well, first of all, you need tools. To prune the roots, you need a sharp scissor or a sharp shearer. That's usually enough. Make sure that they are completely clean so that you're not transferring any bacteria or fungus to the roots, but this is usually enough. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to lift this up here. As you can see, you have roots everywhere inside of the water reservoir. It's actually even coming up on the sides here. So it's actually starting to move up against the wall of the 2 pots here. So what do we do? Well, we know that what roots do is that they grow downwards. When they find something, when they cannot grow downwards, they grow outwards. When they cannot grow outwards, they grow upwards. And the last thing they do is to grow inwards. Why? Well, it's quite easy, because in the bottom there's usually water. So that's the reason it's going down. In the sides of the pot is actually a little bit warmer than the inside of here, in here. So it actually likes to be outside here. But what we're going to do is to cut off these roots, and we're going to try and cut off 1/3 of the roots. You could cut off up to half the roots without harming the plant at all, but we usually recommend 1/3 of the complete root ball. But you have to consider here, because this is a system that looks like this in the bottom. So you have these nylon ropes as well. So you don't want to cut them off, because if you do that, you have no way for the water to transport itself up to the inner pot here. So we'll have to do it very, very slowly. So what I begin with doing is that I will take away the bottom part of this root ball here. And I'll cut away maybe 1/4 of the complete roots here. It's usually the densest part here. It's actually all roots. There are not even any air in between here, because it's very, very dense. I'll show you when I've cut it off. But I'll start by cutting that off, and I'll try to avoid cutting the ropes. Use a sharp scissor or a sharp shearer and just start cutting them off. I'll have to do this on the other side because I'm not left-handed. So. Just start by cutting off from the an outer part of the roots here, and then you move inwards as you go. Because as I said, you don't want to cut off the nylon rope. I can't actually cut more than that, because now I am into the 2 nylon ropes here. So what I'll do is that I'll just use my hands instead. I've cut off enough to try and remove this root ball in the bottom here. So I'll just try and pull that and see if it comes loose. If it doesn't, no, I'm not done yet. I have to cut a little bit more. What has happened inside of here is that the roots are actually growing into the nylon rope. That's why it's hard to get this off, because it's locked onto that nylon rope. So you have to use a little bit of force and try to remove this root ball. You can also feel that some of the roots are actually quite thick, and you need to cut them. You cannot pull them. There. This is what we get in the hands here. It's a massive root ball that we've taken away. Now the next step is to take a look at the roots again, and we'll also try to cut off from the sides here, on all sides of the plant, because we do not want the roots to try and get up into the pots here. So I'll just try and untangle or cut if I have to. What you can use to untangle the roots a little bit is that you can use just a normal fork. This is actually a barbecue fork that I've modified by pushing it outwards a little bit here at the ends, so that I'm not going to tear as many roots as I could, but almost like a garden rake. And I'll just try and loosen some of the roots on the outer sides here, and then I'll cut those off with a scissor. As you can see, I'm fairly tough with the roots here. That's usually not a problem. Just make sure that if this takes a long time, you make sure that the roots are soaked in water or at least moist at all time. They should not dry up when you're doing this. So if it takes a long time, spray it with water or dip it in water and then continue to work on the roots. I think I've loosened up a lot of the roots. Now I'll just cut off like this. Some of those that are on the outside here. Now, will this harm the plant in any way? No, usually not. What actually happens is that when you prune the roots like this, the plant will start to grow like crazy, because where you've pruned the roots, it will start to divide and you will get those small, really, really hungry roots that will start seeking down to the water again. So this is actually a good thing. If you have too much roots, pruning them off is actually a good thing. Okay, so the second way of trying to repot and prune the roots of a self-watering pot is to try and remove as much of the soil, or in this case pumice, that we have in the inner pot, as well as pruning the roots down in the reservoir. But we're not taking the plant away from the inner pot. We're going to try and leave it in the inner pot. So we'll do it like this. Just follow the steps in number 1 by pruning away 1/3 of the roots in the water reservoir. So step 1 is complete. Now to step 2. Now we want to try and remove, as I said before, you have a salt buildup here in this pot. So we need to get rid of as much of that pumice as possible and add some new pumice. But the problem here is that if I try to pull out the plant and remove the pumice, I can't, because you have all of these roots sticking out from the bottom of this inner pot. So I'll try and remove it without doing that. The best way is to try and lay the plant on its side. Now, if you're doing this to a huge plant, a floor-standing plant, I recommend you to be at least 2 persons doing this, because you need someone to hold the plant itself so that it doesn't move around too much and can break, and someone that can work on the roots or work on the pumice or soil that you want to remove. But if it's a small one like this, you can usually do it yourself. So just put it on the side like this. And as you can see, some of that pumice is already starting to fall out of the pot. And by starting to press a little bit on the inner pot here, I'll just try and get out as much as I possibly can without removing the plant from the inner pot. And this will work if you have soil as well, but it's a little bit easier when you have pumice because they come loose a little bit easier. So there's not much more coming out. What I can do now is that I can take a small stick like this that I've just sharpened a little bit, just a wooden stick that I've sharpened, and then I can try and remove even more. Now with this method, you will never get all of the soil out from the inner pot. You will always have some soil here, but I think I've gotten away with maybe 50% of the pomace here. So that's better than nothing. And as I said, this plant hasn't been damaged from that salt buildup. If I saw that the plant wasn't feeling well and I thought it was the reason, then I would have to do method 3 that we're going to show you later. But I'm not doing that now because I don't have to. This is easier for the plant. It's not as big of a deal as the method 3 that I'm showing you later. So what I do now is that I'm going to add some new pomace here, and it's really, really important that I try to get that pomace everywhere, because now I have air pockets. I don't know if you can see that, but you have air pockets now in between the roots and where the pomace is. So I need to get the pomace everywhere all around here. And I'll do that by first adding pomace and then using that wooden stick again. Now when you can't get any more soil or pomace in the inside, just use the stick and start to try and push it down into those crevices. Just work your way slowly around. I'm trying to move the stick on the outside of the pot here, so I'm not trying to poke the roots. I'm only trying to get to those air pockets. And as you can see here, the pomace is actually starting to fall down into those pockets. Now, normally, not all inner pots are see-through like this one, so this actually helps me to see that I've done the work good. But if it's closed, just move yourself slowly around and be meticulous. You can also hit the pot a little bit like this, and some of the stones will fall down. It's the same with soil. If you do like this, some of the soil will also fall down into those small air pockets. So there you have it, the method number 2. Moving on to method number 3. Now this is the most extreme one. And if you, for some reason, need to exchange the pot, you want it in something else, or you know that the plant is not feeling well because of the roots are not settling in your pot, or you have a lot of salt buildup in all of the inner pot, you need to do something radical to prevent certain death of your plant. Then you can do a full repot. And I'll show you exactly what to do. Now the first step is to do what we did in method number 1, and that is to start to prune the water roots. The difference here is that this time we have to prune all of the water roots, because to be able to pull this plant out of this inner pot here, these roots have to either go along with those small holes underneath here, or they need to be taken away. And the first thing almost never works because those holes are fairly small. So we have to prune away all of the water roots. The hard thing here in this case is to try and not harm the nylon rope here. But if you cannot get the plant out of its inner pot without harming the nylon rope, then cut the nylon rope and add another one when you repot in the new pot. So I'll try to keep the nylon rope, but we'll see if it works. I'm cutting all of the roots that are coming out from the pots, trying to get rid of all of them. The hardest part here is actually next to or on the nylon rope. You need to try and get all of those roots that are coming out from the pot next to the nylon rope, because those are the ones that are going to try and keep the plant in the pot. So I'll try and show you here. This is what it looks like now. All of the big roots that are coming out from the holes in the bottom I've cut off. I'll actually try and remove this big one even more. See if it works. Like that. And I've also cut the ones that are coming out with the nylon rope as well. Now I'll try and loosely see if this comes off from the inner pot. This is where you have to make a judgment call. How hard are you willing to push the inner pot here without breaking something on the plant you have? And that's depending on what species you're working with. Now this ficus has a really hard trunk here, and I can feel that I'm not actually doing anything to it, so it can be quite hard, but make sure that you're not breaking your plants. If you are feeling that it doesn't work, you cannot get it off, then you cut off the nylon ropes here as well, and then you try again, because it could get a little bit easier. I can feel it moving now, so I think we're almost there. Yes. Almost. It's the nylon rope that's stuck, so. There you go. I got it off and I have the nylon ropes intact. So what I'll do now is that I'll try to remove as much of the pomace around the roots, and I'll also do like we say in a normal repot. We try and remove 1/3 of the roots that were in this pot, because now we have a chance to reduce the root ball inside of here and create new roots that are growing around that new soil or that new pomace. So I'll remove about 1/4 of the lower parts of the roots here. Just move yourself further and further in towards the inner roots. Go around and around and around, but make sure you don't cut the nylon rope. If you can't get everything off, just use your makeshift rake and try and pull a little bit on the roots. Some of the roots will get a little bit damaged or pull off, but not all of them. And you want to do this anyway because you want the roots in the bottom part here to be looking downwards, because when you give them new soil or new pomace, you want them to be able to start growing directly. If they were smushed together like this, it would take some while before they can find their way and go downwards. So just tease them out. Let's see, I got all the way to where the nylon rope actually was. So I haven't cut the nylon rope. It was laying like this inside of the pot to be able to push water up to the roots. So I can use this again and I can take away all of the roots that are coming out from it because they are no longer in use. Like that. Save that there. Now I'll work a little bit on the sides of the root ball as well. Try and rake out some of those roots and remove some of them as well. So in total we've taken away approximately 1/3. In worst case scenario, we've taken away 50% of the root ball. Now some of you might think that there are some roots here that are very, very thick, so I'll not cut them because that's not good for the plant, but it's actually the opposite. Those really, really thick ones here, we have one here that is, I don't know, maybe 2 millimeters wide. Those are actually not that active, not that good. So you can take them away, and what you will get from that point where you cut this thick root off is that it will trigger the plant to send out new, small, thin roots. Those are the hard-working roots. Those are the ones that will pick up more water and more nutrients than the old, thick roots. So there you go. Now it's time to repot it. I'm actually going to repot it in the same inner pot. But you could now use this plant to a completely different system or a completely different pot if you need to exchange that. So I'll just use the same nylon rope again. I'll put that through the holes in the bottom here. If it's possible to do that. Make sure that they are almost even like this, so they really reaches all the way down to the bottom of the pot here. As you can see, when I put this down, it actually touches the bottom of the pot. That's what you want. So now I'll place this in pumice again, a pumice mix of pumice and clay, and put some pumice in the bottom. Just try to measure out how much, a couple of centimeters. Like I said before, you can use standard planting soil. Make sure if you do that to mix up that standard planting soil with pumice, perlite or leca. We have those here. You can mix normal standard planting soil with pumice, leca or perlite. What that does is that it helps the normal standard planting soil to have better drainage because it has a tendency to absorb too much water. But by adding something of this, and when we say something, we say somewhere in between 20 to 30% of pumice, perlite or leca together with 70 to 80% standard planting soil. That is a good mix that will work inside of here. Or you can use pumice as I do. That works perfectly as well. Now I know that when I put water into the system, that water will be transported by the nylon rope up to the inner root ball of the plant, because the nylon rope is lying somewhere here inside in the middle. So I know that the roots will get moist. I'll just add some pumice. By tapping the sides of the pot here, I try to get all of the pumice to fall down into the air gaps or air bubbles that are between the inside of the pot and the root ball. When I've done that, I can also take my wooden stick again and try to push down as much as I can. And the pumice will fall down into those crevices. Just move all around the sides of the pot and try to close those gaps as much as you can. If you need to, add more pumice. And do it all over again. So there you go. Now this was the most extreme method of repotting your plant that is in a self-watering pot. Now, as I said before, both these plants have been in these pots for more than 10 years, maybe 12 or 13 years. Now this is the first time I do the third method on these plants. And it was really time. I could see on the pumice, I could see on the roots that it was time to do this. So, but you can see that I waited a very long time before I did this. So you can use method 1 and 2 the first couple of years, up to 10, maybe 15 years before you need to do the third method. Now, when you've done either method 1, 2, or 3, make sure that you water the plant directly. So you make sure that all of the roots get to be moist. And then you keep it moist for at least a month. It should never dry up. And also, place it somewhere where it gets a lot of indirect sunlight. If you normally have your plant somewhere where it's quite shaded or dark even, when you've done this, move it to a brighter spot. And then after a month, you can start to move it back to where you had it before. And just continue taking care of it as you've had for all of those years. Now, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps our channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do. Hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where you can get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes a little bit more. Now, until next time, hej då!